In 2005, the Canadian government of the day launched a comprehensive study of the tax and regulatory burden faced by Canadian businesses. This was likely in response to the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses study, which found that 65% of its members considered government regulations and the associated paperwork to be one of their members' greatest concerns, second only to the tax burden itself. Between the 2005 base year and 2020, no less than 4 analyses were published. The first 2 were compiled by Statistics Canada in conjunction with Industry Canada. The last 2 were published by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business itself, with 2 different collaborators. In this first of 2 videos, we'll look at the paperwork study published by Statistics Canada in 2010. According to the authors of the government's report in 2010, administrative tasks and excessive paperwork burden remain a long-standing distraction for business owners. Taking a broader view, the problem of excessive paperwork can lead to reduced business startups, trade and investment barriers, and an overall decline in economic productivity by making it relatively more expensive for Canadian businesses to operate. The study provided an analysis of costs in the 2005 reference year. They then measured the costs 3 years later at the conclusion of the study. Sadly, they found that costs actually increased significantly during the 3-year term of the study. In Figure 7, we see that costs per employee are much higher for our smallest businesses. For all sizes of businesses, except the largest, costs increased by between 5 and 25%. For businesses with 100 or more employees, costs went down by about 13%. This result underlines our policymakers' bias in favor of larger businesses. Unlike many policymakers, business schools, and most professional bodies, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business understands that small business is very important and accounts for about 76% of private sector employment. In Table 6 from the study, we see that income tax filing is the most commonly outsourced service by businesses of all sizes. This is followed by the preparation and remittance of regular monthly payroll. The tendency to outsource these services actually increases as companies get bigger. Income tax preparation in particular is very complex. It represents an almost impossible challenge for anyone not trained and experienced in Canadian taxation. In the next slide, we'll visit Canada's Department of Justice website to get a sense of the extent of the challenge. For the moment, though, it's important to understand that Canada's businesses overwhelmingly outsource income tax work, and that the tendency increases as companies grow. Payroll compliance is the second most outsourced service for businesses of all sizes. Like income tax, the tendency to outsource payroll increases as companies grow. However, payroll is not as technically challenging as income tax, and payroll support work is typically outsourced to specialist payroll firms. Professional accountants rarely provide monthly payroll services, although they often prepare and file annual T4s and payroll summaries for small businesses.
Canada's Department of Justice maintains a website that allows anyone to access legislation. The 19 most frequently accessed acts are listed along with their size in kilobytes. If you were to add the number of kilobytes of each, the Income Tax Act itself accounts for fully 45% of the total. This gives us some sense of the relative complexity. Consider also that each province has its own separate Income Tax Act, and the technical challenge becomes apparent. In this slide, we look at the number of businesses organized by the number of employees. It is immediately apparent that Canada's businesses are overwhelmingly very small. What's more, over 44% of Canada's public sector workers work for large organizations with 500 or more employees. In fact, Statistics Canada refers rather disparagingly to what they call micro-businesses as those with 4 or fewer employees. Collectively, these micro-businesses make up about 24% of all private sector workers. That's about the same as the much-loved medium-sized businesses and their larger cousins employ combined.
While the size of a business is an important determinant of its compliance needs and the availability of staff resources to meet those needs, it is probably not appropriate to include all of the accounting and tax preparation costs with what the authors call the costs of regulation. For example, accounting and bookkeeping are not merely regulatory costs. Is the cost of preparing and issuing invoices simply a regulatory cost, Or is it just a cost of doing business? Long before there was such a thing as income tax, businesses kept track of what their customers owed them. Businesses must ensure that customers are billed appropriately, and that all payments by customers are correctly attributed to the appropriate receivable account. While this may be important, from a tax reporting perspective, management must do this anyway if they wish to continue in business. Similarly, they must meet their contractual obligations to pay employees appropriately. The authors of the report acknowledge that, because external service providers do not need to lower their fees to consumers, it is not clear whether the cost savings resulting from successful paperwork burden reduction initiatives benefit businesses that rely on external service provider assistance, as external service providers may keep their fees up and retain the savings for themselves in the form of higher profits. Additional research should be carried out to determine the extent to which cost savings from successful paperwork reduction initiatives can be passed along to businesses.
In the next video, we'll look at results from 2 studies by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business in 2013 and 2020. In our view, this will address the issue of the extent to which cost savings can be passed along to businesses.